Have you ever played Clue? This is a detective game that asks participants to discover the murderer, the location, and the murder weapon. The results can be Miss White did it in the library with a candlestick. Or I accuse Colonel Mustard of the murder. He did it in the kitchen with a knife. Or I suspect Miss Scarlett in the lobby with the revolver, and so on. In the coroner's inquest into the murder of Carole Fecteau and those of Raymond Grimard and Manon Bergeron, one sometimes has the impression of being at the heart of an enigma where the avenues seem endless because of the many twists and turns. Les trois meurtres, avenue sans fin. La Tribune, 16 septembre 1978. Reach back and recall the opening of Patricia Pearson's series in the National Post, Who Killed Teresa? Her first sentence was, "We tend to think of unsolved mysteries as a parlor game." 24 years earlier, Sherbrooke, 1978, the editors of La Tribune were likening the murder of Grimard, Bergeron, Fecteau to a game of Clue. Why care about these small-time hoods and drug peddlers? Because they may hold the key to solving your greatest personal mystery. The one you cannot solve is the one that keeps your heart from mending, the one that propels you and keeps you halted in place. End time. In his infinite wisdom, coroner Jean-Pierre Rivard decided his inquiry would be a threefer. The murder inquests of Raymond Grimard, Manon Bergeron, and Carole Fecteau would all be done together. Whether this was done for thrift or expedience or under pressure from police is unknown, but the results were the creation of a Gordian knot of confusion. It was hard to separate the twists and turns of all the testimonies and determine what information belonged with what potential criminal process, which bucket. How do you argue three at once if the whole purpose of the coroner's process is to determine whether or not a criminal act was actually even committed and by whom? What if the conclusion is three different assassins? Coroner Rivard had an answer for that too. His process had already predetermined the identity of the guilty party, Fernand Laplante. And by now you should be wondering, you should be begging to know, who is this Fernand Laplante? Well, he wasn't any Mother Nature's son. Laplante was no stranger to the Sherbrooke criminal underworld. In 1965, at the age of 20, he served a 6-month sentence at Saint Vincent de Paul Penitentiary for the burglary of a Quaticook garage. In 1969, he received another 2 years for breaking and entry. Apparently, the charge never stuck. In 1970, Laplante and his partner Gaston Brochou were caught red-handed with $27,000 worth of men's clothing from a Magog haberdashery stashed in the trunks of their cars. In 1971, he attempted to burgle the home of a small arms collector, again in Magog. By 1974, Laplante had racked up 15 convictions, when he was again arrested for attempting to steal a safe from the Felix Market in Sherbrooke. Robbery, burglary, breaking and entry, but not murder. After that July 1978 attempted bank heist in Hadley, to which Laplante was a party along with Jean Charland, and after the murders of Grimard and Bergeron, which quickly followed 2 days later, police arrested Fernand Laplante on August 3rd in Montreal during another attempted holdup. Now, someone who worked closely on these cases later told me that the police suspected Laplante of committing murders in his past, but not these murders. I was told it didn't matter that he hadn't killed Grimard and Bergeron. They wanted him so badly. It didn't matter that they had the wrong murderers for Carole Fecteau, we heard last time. It was close enough. Jean-Pierre Rivard began his coroner's inquest in late August 1978. The star witness was Jean Charland. At first, Charland's testimony went smoothly. He told the court how he was unemployed, how Carole Fecteau was his little brother's girlfriend, and that he had seen Fecteau 2 or 3 times, quote, at the most, and how he and his brother and, quote, 2 other guys had stolen Helen Larochelle's vehicle. Recall that Helen Larochelle was Carole Fecteau's roommate. When questions turned to Fernand Laplante, it's then that things got a little strange. Things got a little sticky. Charland stated that he knew the guy, that he was usually armed, that he lent Laplante $160 so he could buy a .32 caliber revolver. When prosecutor Michel Côté continued to press Jean Charland about Fernand Laplante, Charland suddenly cried out in the coroner's court, quote, "The 7-page statement I gave to the police is false, from one end to the other. I was tired, and I made it because the police had told me that Laplante had taken me in, up to the neck, and I wanted to take him in too." For the uninitiated, what Charland meant was that the police had told Charland that Laplante had blamed him for the murders. So then Charland turned on Laplante and said that it was in fact he who killed the 3 victims. Lying to a witness during a police interrogation is generally, well, I'd politely say frowned upon. It's done. There's no scientific evidence that that technique produces results, but it's not illegal. When questioning resumed, Charland again reiterated that everything he had said about Fecteau at the beginning was true, and that all the information that came after that about Fernand Laplante was false. Undeterred in the outbursts of his courtroom, and faced with what was clearly perjury by Jean Charland, the court continued, and Coroner Rivard blithely called his next witness 20-year-old Claire Dussault. Laplante and Dussault were only recently married that summer 1978. The scene in court was repeated almost identical to Charland's eruption. Claire Dussault-Laplante started calmly, stating she had known Carole Fecteau since February 1978. She talked of how shortly before her disappearance, she accompanied Fecteau to pick up some hashish. The questioning then turned to Fernand Laplante. Dussault-Laplante was coaxed to say that her husband had taken a trip to Quaticook, near the site where Fecteau's body was discovered in East Hereford. Apparently, Laplante was from Quaticook as well, as was Carole Fecteau. So how much that meant anything is questionable. But it's at this point that Claire Dussault cut off her testimony, saying it was all false, and how she had been molested and beaten by police into giving false statements. Striking a witness under interrogation is illegal, but we'll get back to that. Following the second interruption of Rivard's kangaroo court, the coroner immediately adjourned the inquiry until September 15th, 1978, presumably so that police could administer some additional persuading of their star witness, Jean Charland. Recall that when Carole Fecteau's roommate was questioned, Helen La Rochelle mentioned that Fecteau was fearful of two people she referred to as Claire and Fern. So we can surmise that she meant Claire Dussault and Fernand Laplante, but one now wonders how much La Rochelle was coached by police into giving this answer, given that both Dussault and Charland refused to testify because they felt their testimony had been coerced by police. And as we shall see, this was a pattern for the township Sortie du Québec that calls into question all their investigations from this era. 3 weeks later, when the inquest resumed, Charland did not appear any more sure of his statements. He talked of an Oldsmobile he had sold to Laplante and of Raymond Grimard's Cadillac, which they had used to go to Montreal. This is most assuredly the Cadillac found at the Lennoxville Golf Course, registered under his girlfriend's name, Manon Bergeron. Mostly Charland just stated that he didn't know very much, or he didn't remember anything. Never mind Charland's sudden amnesia, the SQ would soon come up with a method to make sure he remembered. Claire Dussault was called back to testify, but her statements were, like Charland, a repeat of her first performance. Small talk, but few incriminating details. She spoke of an incident that occurred in early July outside the Moulin Rouge, where she accidentally backed the car she was driving into a motorcycle belonging to the Jetins. After her marriage to Fernand on July 14th, the couple spent most of their time in Saint-Denis-du-Brompton until her husband's arrest that August 3rd in Montreal. Any of the information she had provided to officers about Fernand Laplante's involvement in the murders of Fecteau, Grimard, Bergeron was all, quote, blabbering and, quote, a bunch of lies, she told investigators, because she was molested and beaten by them. On October 16th, 1978, Coroner Jean-Pierre Rivard held Fernand Laplante criminally responsible for the violent deaths of Raymond Grimard and Manon Bergeron and Carole Fecteau. In late December 1978, Laplante was charged with 3 counts of first-degree murder, with a trial set for January 1979. If found guilty, Laplante faced a sentence of life imprisonment. When you look at Coroner Jean-Pierre Rivard's official verdicts for all 3 murders, all dated October 16th, 1978, what strikes you is the uniformity of all 3 documents. They could have almost been done using carbon paper and triplicate. 3 distinct murders in 2 different places at 2 different times. 2 victims shot, 1 bludgeoned and strangled to death, yet only 1 party responsible. This was a sprint to judgment. The coroner and police hastily and aggressively drew the conclusion that only one man was responsible for all the uncharacteristic violence that took place over the course of a couple of weekends in June and July 1978. The evidence was clearly pointing to several parties involved. There was already evidence of a criminal underworld that worked in groups, in packs, that hotel shakedown in January, the casing of the bank in Hatley 2 days before the Grimard and Bergeron murders, Fecteau selling drugs to both Charlin and Grimard. Yet it was, quote, proven to the satisfaction of the coroner that Fernand Laplante was the only guilty party. At the close of the year, Jean-Pierre Rivard unexpectedly announced that he was stepping down as coroner effective December 31st, 1978. Rivard was a young guy, between 30 and 40. So this was kind of a shock. He should have been in that position for decades. And Rivard called the work of the coroner thankless. And in its announcement, La Tribune reminded the public that, quote, a coroner always works behind the scenes of death, end quote. Perhaps a rebuke to Rivard and the ones pulling his strings that he'd become too much the focus of attention. A coroner in Quebec, we've discussed this before, was often a lawyer, rarely a medical professional. Rivard was neither, learning the trade, well, a professional notary before fading into obscurity. Rivard was a notary public. Not a judge, he's not a lawyer, he's not a medical examiner. A few years ago, I had the pleasure of speaking with Quebec criminologist Jean-Claude Bernheim, and he told me that in the era of the 1970s, the coroner worked with police forces, and that the coroner, quote, made decisions not on facts, but in the interests of the police, end quote. He said that when police officers were involved in a case, the coroner always took the side of law enforcement. If you don't respond to the coroner, you can be held responsible, and your testimony can be used against you. This is exactly what happened to Fernand Laplante. I asked Bernheim if it were possible for a coroner to lie in the interest of the police. And Bernheim responded without missing a beat, fully. What agitated police more than anything in this entire process was Laplante's steadfast refusal to play his part as the fall guy in a preordained outcome. Laplante would not testify at Rivard's coroner's inquest, even though he was subpoenaed to do so. During the testimonies of his wife and Charlin, he shouted in the court. He did not know anything, did not know why he was there, and before he went on board, he wanted to know what had been said about him in his absence. Not only did Coroner Rivard declare Laplante criminally responsible for all three murders and fit to stand trial, he cited Laplante with contempt of court and sentenced him to 1 year in jail for refusing to testify at his inquest. 15 years later, when Laplante was appealing his guilty verdict for the Grimard and Bergeron murders, a contrite Fernand Laplante, then serving his life sentence in a maritime penitentiary, said he, quote, had paid dearly for his lack of cooperation. Now, I've skipped ahead to what you should all have guessed eventually would have occurred. That Laplante was found guilty, but frankly, Laplante's guilty verdict was the least surprising element of his trial, as we will soon see. So, This is the stuff that breaks your heart. An unjust process, sentencing a man for life imprisonment for a crime he did not commit. But I say wipe away your tears and focus your attention on one important detail. Rivard's 1-year sentence for contempt occurred in October 1978, meaning Fernand Laplante was in prison all through the month of November 1978. Therefore, Laplante could not have played any part in the murder of Teresa Allure or her disappearance on November 3rd, 1978. But someone was free and operating in the Sherbrooke community in November 1978. The man who fingered Laplante, Jean Charland. This is who killed Teresa. Yeah, I feel I'm playing a little bit to an empty theater. And maybe that's why I'm trying to fight the urge to perform. I don't know if anyone is even paying a modicum of interest or giving any attention to this at all. They never do. I think sometimes people would just prefer that I went away and kept my mouth shut. That's all I'm going to say about that. But it is discouraging. But I've planned this out, so I'm gonna play my hand the way I plan to play that hand, and then after that we'll see. If you like the podcast, please go to the website teresaallure.com, TheresaAllore.com, and you can follow us on Facebook, Twitter, Instagram, YouTube. You can subscribe. I believe that's all for today. We'll come back next week and answer the question, I guess. So Charland was out in November 1978. What was he doing? We'll answer that question. Until then, this has been Who Killed Teresa? I'm your host, John Allure. Have yourselves a great, great day.